God's wrath!
It's not every day that you receive a break in the case, but tonight the story that awaits FBI agent Wesley Doyle will have him rethinking everything that he has come to believe.
As for the agent in charge of the God's Hand case, said he had some important info on it.
A case that has been going on for much, much longer than what anybody would believe, but that's the reason that Mr. Fenton Meeks is here tonight, to finally reveal the truth by telling the full account of how it all began and what led his brother Adam to become the God's Hand killer.
I can't destroy them all.
I can't take it anymore.
Frailty is one of the best films that not near enough people have seen, and has one of the greatest twists in all of horror, with a story that is centered around this question: what would you do if God came to you in a vision declaring that the end of the world is near, and that you and your family have been chosen to fight and destroy demons? It's one thing for you to have seen this vision, but what if it was someone close to you?
What makes you think that your brother's a God's Hand killer?
It might sound crazy at first, but what if it's true? All of these big questions, which is what led to there being a lot of confusion around this movie. But before we can answer any of them or figure out exactly why Fenton stole an ambulance and his brother's body, which he then buried in the rose garden next to their childhood home, then immediately drove straight to Agent Doyle's office to speak to him about the God's Hand case, we must first go all the way back to the summer of 1979.
We live right behind the Thurman Public Rose Garden.
In a nice little house in a small town where there are only a couple more weeks left in school, and everything is just as normal as can be for Fenton and Adam Meeks. Fenton is 12, Adam is 9. Their mother sadly passed away shortly after giving birth to Adam, and their father is a mechanic in a town over. All of this leading Fenton to be the one to take care of his brother for as long as he can remember. And it's little details like that that make for a good story, with a huge help to this movie in particular being the fact that Bill Paxton, who plays the father, is also the director, with this actually being his directorial debut. Paxton had stated that after reading the script, he was unsure of how a different person would handle his role as a father of two young boys in a horror film, and ultimately felt that knowing himself and the character, he would be best to direct. The word that he specifically used was subtlety, something that if you're paying attention, you can see all throughout the film. Just like with the very first time we see him in this movie, the focus is not on him, but it's on his wedding ring. Though these little cues do not only apply to him, but to everyone. The first time you sit through Frailty, you get pulled into the story kind of subjectively, and there's this whole kind of creep factor, but on your second viewing, there's a lot of satisfaction as there are a lot of clues laid out in front of the viewer. This is a quote from Bill Paxton about his film, and I 100% agree. And while we'll talk more about the late and great Paxton later in this video, right now we have to prepare for the night that everything changed. Which of course means that you have to get ready for bed with your aching teeth brushed, goodnight kiss from Dad, Curtis, and yourself all tucked in, so you can then quietly wonder about that weird spot on your shoulder. Surely it's fine though, right? It's just been years since you've been to the doctor, and that spot does look different than it did last month. But we both know the one thing that's worse than spiraling off into a void of what could be wrong is having to find the time to call to even make an appointment. Luckily, with ZocDoc, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Not only can you book appointments at any time online, but you can also read all of the reviews from the doctors that are in your area, as well as see which ones actually take your insurance. Not only is it easy to use, but it's also free. And that would even have Curtis tell you to stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/Polter to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today, so you can stop worrying about that weird spot or your aching tooth, or even talk to somebody about those hallucinations you've been having. That's ZocDoc.com/Polter. And thank you, ZocDoc, for sponsoring this video.
I need you both to listen to me very carefully. Something's happened.
A vision from God that revealed the truth and the future of the world. The end is near and the final battle is about to be fought. So to prepare, the devil has released his demons into the world. But this visit is more than just a warning. It is a calling for the Meeks family. They have been chosen to fight these demons and destroy them. Hearing this, of course, would be a lot to take in, and is for both Adam and Fenton. Fenton seems very unsure about all of this, but Adam's just scared, even more so by how distraught their father is. Their dad, though, assures them that they have been chosen and that God will protect them. They don't have to fear these demons, they need to destroy them. Pick them up one by one and pitch them out of this world. That is their purpose here.
The angel called us God's hands.
And I just love both of the kids' response to hearing this. Adam taking his father's reassurance that everything will be okay, and then seeing this as them becoming a family of superheroes. But Fenton just flatly says that none of this makes any sense. And their father understands because it does sound crazy, but he tells him it's the truth. Then he explains the rest of what he was told by the angel. First, that they can see the demons while other people can't, unless they are other people like them that have also been chosen. Second is that God is going to send them 3 weapons that they must use to destroy these demons, though they don't know what these weapons are just yet or exactly when they will get them. And third is that they are not to tell anyone about any of this, or if they do, it will put that person and them in danger. It's after this that their father tells them something that I think is just perfect, because he didn't want to tell them about this vision until he had time to think about it and really figure out what exactly happened. But the angel said that he had to tell them now.
I didn't know what to say or how to feel.
Do you understand what I told you?
Everything in the scene has already been great, but the way that it slowly pulls away from the two sides of the room is genius, with Fenton on one side and all of his doubts about what is and has happened, and Adam and their father on the other side being confident and looking forward to what the future holds. Then you stack on top of that the distant echoing voice of his father trying to explain to him that everything will be okay, with the overlay of the older Fenton explaining how he felt in this moment. All of it's just amazing and puts us as the audience in a very similar spot to Fenton, because we too now have to decide what to believe. Because there's definitely a lot of questions that would come up and I feel like would need to be answered, but right now the only thing that we have to go off of is what their father has said and what we see when he has this vision, which is simply him lying in his bed when across the room, the top of one of his trophies begins to glow to the point that he needs to lift his hand in front of his face to block the brightness, but we don't see any brightness shining on him, making it seem like all of this is just happening in his head. But we should also be reminded that this story is being told to us from the now adult Fenton's perspective, which realistically does two things for the film. One, that it covers up a lot of so-called mistakes, as this is being told so long after it happened, and 2, it allows for the film to work within its small budget since so much of it may or may not be real. As for right now, all we know is that something clearly happened to their father, and that now the question stands for both Fenton and us of, did God really visit their father?
I refused to believe it. That whole next week was just a dream, too.
A dream that never seemed to end for Fenton, but then shifted into a nightmare when his father finally began bringing home the magical weapons. An axe, a pair of gloves, and a lead pipe. God had led his father to find them, as well as sent another message from an angel saying that soon they will be receiving the names of the first 7 demons that they need to destroy. But another question I'm sure some of y'all have had cross your mind is, what exactly is the father's name? And we don't know. We are never told what Bill Paxton's character's name is in this film other than Dad. But the name that we do get is the name of the axe, Otis. We see the morning that he's led to find Otis and the gloves while on the way to work because he sees a beam of light shining on a barn, and inside is the axe and gloves, but we don't ever see anything about how he found the lead pipe. And we also don't see anything about the angel coming back. And it's little things like this that make me skeptical of everything. Like, I've seen a few other people speculate that the father's real name is Otis and that this is just his axe, which wouldn't be something that either of the boys would question. After all, the axe was supposedly meant for him. Though, even if Otis is not their father's name, it does make the axe stand out more than the gloves or the pipe, almost as if it's its own character, which was Paxton's idea and intention. But it's how he came up with the name of Otis that is one of my personal favorite movie facts of all time, because it was when he was out scouting locations for them to shoot this movie that he came across a homeless man who he tried to give money to, but the man didn't want his charity. So instead, Paxton offered to buy the rights to his name for this film. And that man's name was Otis. And for as cool as that is, what isn't is the gap between Fenton and his father, who I'll just call Dad from here on, Dad Meeks.
Maybe you're not right in the head.
Fenton also wonders if it all could have been a dream, but Dad just assures him that it really did happen and that this isn't something he would make up, which first says a lot about the relationship that they have, as Fenton is comfortable enough with saying this to his father, and Dad is understanding enough to speak with him on the matter. But also, Dad makes an interesting point because they aren't a super duper religious family or anything, so it really doesn't make much sense for this to be something that he would just come up with out of nowhere. It's just after this that there is a deleted scene that, while not necessarily needed, does expound on both of these thoughts, as Fenton, not having an answer to help his dad, decides to attempt fighting fire with fire by diving in and studying the Bible to disprove his father's claims, because he is sure that if he doesn't do something soon, his father's going to kill someone. He knows this because that same night in the scene before, when he tells his father that he might not be right in the head, Dad takes out the list that he received from God of the first 7 names of the demons they need to destroy. Though this time, we aren't just told about it, we actually see the beginning of Dad's vision, as it was while he was at work that he got underneath a car and then witnessed the underside of the engine transform into a cathedral where an angel with a flaming sword then flew down to him. We both see this from his perspective, but we also see him from a distance, just sort of zoned out underneath the vehicle. But sure enough, shortly after, Dad rolls himself out from underneath the car and begins writing down the names.
These are people's names.
That's right.
The names of people who only look like people, but in truth are actually demons. And it's only when he lays his hand on the demon that their true form will be revealed. That's what the gloves are for, as to not expose the demon or God's hand too soon. And in just a moment, we will see how the pipe and the axe are used. But I'm sure you already have a good idea. It's here where the deleted scene of Fenton doing his best to convince his father of a different path fits into the film, as he too has to take a different path from the most obvious of just telling someone, because he knows if he does, it won't end well. So instead, we find him reading the Bible until one day he approaches his father and reads Proverbs 14:12. There is a path before each person that seems right, but it ends in death. Dad is intrigued. He knows the verse and then asks for the Bible. And after only a moment, he hands it back and tells Fenton to read 14:32 as well, which says, "The wicked are crushed by disaster, but the godly have refuge when they die."
I think all this is wrong and you're trying to prove it. I respect that, son.
And so do I, as this was my first thought, try to fact check what God supposedly told Dad with what has been told to others in the Bible, which is where I've found an interesting side to this film, since I've seen people more recently label this movie as religious horror. Though when it was released, there was a very different worry that they had to deal with.
Do you anticipate that some religious groups will take offense?
I hope not. You know, this movie's not the gospel according to us. It's a what-if movie. It's more science fiction, fantasy, and horror.
He goes on to say that he wasn't making this movie to create any type of controversy, though, like many other films that deal with this subject matter, it does have the fundamental beliefs and it questions that. He also continues on saying that he always viewed it more as a familial tragedy over anything else, with the question at the very center of the film being, did the dad actually speak with God or not? So for now, just understand that this movie wasn't meant to be on one side or the other of any religious arguments. It was specifically made as a what if. And I would say more, but there's just way too much that we haven't covered yet that will help us make sense of everything. Just as Fenton is still trying to make sense of everything that his father is currently saying, someone who is also still trying to figure it out as he goes, because Dad even admits that before the angel visited, he wasn't even sure if he really believed, having always just gone to church more out of habit, but now he knows that God is real. And not only that, they now have a direct line with God, which causes Adam to ask if that means that they don't have to go to church anymore. And Dad's just like, it sure does. And Adam's super excited about it. And Fenton just looks terrified, because he really is going to have to do all of this on his own. As Dad then picks up the book that he was reading a moment ago with the title of Angels. I point out the book because we see him reading multiple things throughout this movie, but it's never the Bible. It's always something to do with visions or angels. But for Fenton, he still has a lot more reading to do in hopes that something will help. Though it's not until he makes it to the New Testament that he feels assured enough to speak with his father again, knowing that with Jesus, everything will be okay. And surprisingly, Dad agrees with everything that he has to say. claiming that it is all right and true.
But it only applies to humans, son, not to demons.
Keep all of that in mind because we'll come back to it later, but what Dad says next is what I like most about this entire deleted section of the film, because he has seen all the work that Fenton has put into this and sees how determined he is, and he tells him that he's proud of him, taking it right back to the word that Paxton used for his character: subtlety. Many other films and stories would take this in the direction of the angry and deranged father, but not here. Even when, right after this conversation, Adam walks in claiming that he too has received his own list from God, a list full of names of kids he goes to school with that have been mean to him. Instead of scolding Adam for lying, he gently pulls the truth out of him and explains that we can't just make stuff like that up. They have been called to destroy demons, which is a good thing, not to kill people, because that's a bad thing.
Don't worry. God will send you your own list when you're older.
And with that, Fenton only has one option left: tell someone. But he no longer has that same determination and ultimately runs away from the police station instead of into it, not realizing that he was leaving behind his final chance to stop his father's plan. As it's that evening that their father doesn't come home, leaving the boys to fend for themselves, and Fenton begin preparing his brother for the worst, even going as far as to tell Adam that it may be best for them to run away. And for as much as neither of them wants to go, the problem lies in Adam wanting to stay with his father and Fenton wanting to stay with his brother. It's the sound of the truck in the driveway that wakes Fenton. Out of his window, he can see his father carrying something over his shoulder to the shed behind the house. Without waking Adam, he grabs a flashlight and slowly approaches Dad and the woman that he has tied up on the ground beside him. We can see that she has been crying and has a little bit of blood trickling from her head down onto her white shirt, as well as Dad having a bit of blood from the lead pipe that he has tucked into his pocket on the back of his shirt. As he tells Fenton to help him and opens the doors to the shed to carry this woman inside, it's here that we can hear Adam calling from the back door.
Dad, who is that?
That's a demon, son.
A demon that looks like a woman named Cynthia Harbridge, the first name on the list. It's here that the film takes a shift. So far, it's just been building up to what could happen until this moment, when we see these two young boys and their father gathered together in a shed with a demon that their father drove 45 minutes away from home to take from hers, to bring all the way back here so they can destroy her. Everything is getting very real very quick. Fenton begging his father not to do this, to not go through with it, and Dad wishing that he could spare him from all of this, but he knows that this is what they were called to do, for they are God's servants and his will must be served. Taking Otis in hand, Dad steps closer and we cut back to where we first started in Agent Doyle's office, whose first question is if it's true. But Fenton just answers his question with the question of why would he make all of this up? And there's not a good answer to that, so Doyle asks, where's his father now? And Fenton just answers with dead, as Agent Hull opens the door asking if he needs to stay or if it's all right for him to leave Doyle by himself. Doyle tells him to go and then gets closer to hear more of Fenton's story, even filling in the next part by saying that his father had killed the woman in front of him, but Fenton corrects Doyle because that's not how his father would have put it.
He believed that when he laid his hands on her, it revealed her sins.
And we see that moment, but all that is revealed to us is the reaction of each one of them. Fenton being in this sort of shock and just disbelief at everything, but both Adam and Dad looking absolutely terrified in this moment, as well as the woman looking so frightened at what is happening. It takes 2 times. The surprise of it all caused him to release his grip far too soon, but that second time leaves him without words, only actions. As he stands, he takes Otis in hand and prepares to swing. No more time to think, no more time to hear the murmurs of this so-called woman before him or the shouts to stop from his son behind him. He simply does what he was called to do and destroy the demon at his feet. It doesn't end here, though, as we fade to the rose garden where they're disposing of what's left. And this is one of those moments I believe the limited budget helps this film a lot, since we don't get to see what the body looks like. We don't even get to see exactly what they are emptying out of these bags into the grave, leaving us with a lot of room for questions. But what we do see is Dad covered in sweat and dirt as he's been digging, and Adam too as he's been helping, all while Fenton is sitting to the side crying his eyes out for what he just witnessed. Dad tries both to calm and correct Fenton for this, as she wasn't human, and it's Dad's question to Fenton if he saw her true form when he touched her or not that Adam speaks up, saying he saw it. But Fenton just claims that he killed her. Destroyed, not killed. Dad says that he destroyed the demon that even to him at first looked like a woman.
But after I touched her, all I could see was the evil, and I had to do it.
Dad reassures Fenton that the next time he will be able to see the truth, the next demon's true form. It's this talk about doing this all again that sends Fenton into a spiral. There can't be a next time. He won't let there be a next time, but Dad is clear that this is what they were called to do, and this is what they will do. But Fenton says that he will tell, to which he is reminded that if he does, someone will die. The angel made it very clear, and it is not to be forgotten. Though even now, with the older Fenton telling this story to Agent Doyle, it's clear that a lot of people have died. According to the papers, the God's Hand killer has for sure killed one person, but that's only because one body has been found. And it's that body that was found with a note claiming that the God's Hand had taken this one and the rest of the bodies were his to keep. Fenton has a very good idea of where these bodies are. The Rose Garden. Doyle understands a little better now and wonders why Fenton just didn't tell him sooner, but Fenton simply asks if he would have believed him. And it's with that they set off to the Rose Garden, but before they can even make it to the car, Agent Doyle pulls out a pair of handcuffs and throws them to Fenton, just in case. So Fenton obliges, and they set off. In the car, Doyle doesn't seem to understand how someone could keep a secret like this for so long, but Fenton just did what many people would do. He avoided it because he wanted to. Then it's here that we have a more interesting note than what I first thought, as when Fenton first arrived in Doyle's office and Doyle finally gets there, Fenton is holding the picture of Doyle's mother that was on his desk. A couple of times even bringing up his mother in conversation, going as far as to say that he has his mother's eyes, and now in the car asking him, why is it that he only had the one picture in his office? Which at first does sound kind of odd, but we have to remember that Fenton's mom passed when he was only 3 years old, and right next to his own bed, we can see a photo of her on the nightstand. As it turns out though, Doyle's mother is also dead, but it's not from childbirth. Instead, she was brutally murdered days after that photo was taken, the killer having never been caught. Doyle even going as far as to claim that the killer is a lot like Fenton's father. Fenton wonders if that's why Doyle took this job, causing Doyle to comment about how good Fenton is at reading people, something that could potentially also make him a good cop. But Fenton says that that was just something he thought about when he was a kid. Doyle states that he has good instincts, something that every cop needs. And right now, his own instincts are telling him that Fenton is hiding something.
Well, why don't you just keep talking? Maybe I'll figure that out.
A full month passed after that night in the Rose Garden. What happened was never mentioned by either Dad or Adam, and Fenton had nearly convinced himself that everything was over until one afternoon the boys arrive home to see a new van in the driveway as Dad tells Fenton that he had to cancel the plans. He had to stay over at a friend's tonight because they have work to do. Edward March was the next name on the list, but this time Dad wouldn't act alone in bringing this demon back to the shed to be destroyed. No, this time he takes Adam and Fenton with him in the middle of the day to what I think is a resale shop, where we see Mr. March making his way into the store right as they pull up and park beside him. Now, of course, it doesn't take very long for him to come back out of the store. They distract him for a moment, knock him out with a pipe, load him into the back of the van, and drive off. But in this, there are three interesting points that shouldn't be overlooked. First one is something that I've already mentioned with Dad reading another book. This one is called Holy Visions, which I, for the life of me, cannot figure out if this is a real book or something that was made for the movie. It says that it's by Brian Moore on the cover, but it doesn't seem to be the same Brian Moore that comes up when you search Brian Moore and Brian Moore books. I don't know. It would be nice to be able to check and see exactly what he's reading about. So if anybody out there knows if this is a real book or not, please let me know. It might not seem important to literally anyone else on the planet, but I think it would be cool to compare what he is reading in these books with the experiences that he claims to have. It would also be really cool to add to my own collection. The second point is the fact that it's the middle of the day, in the middle of town. This, of course, is a huge concern to Fenton, but Dad responds with one of the most terrifying lines in the film. Dad told us that there were moments in everyone's life when they could just suddenly disappear without anyone knowing where they went or why. He said those were the moments that God's hand could just reach out and take you. This makes me think back to multiple moments where I have been 100% sure if I were to disappear right now, no one would ever know what happened. And I actually found one of these moments looking back through some of my old videos that I've made over the years.
My 35-minute drive is now almost at 2 hours long. But look at that, that's nice. Oh, I'm so confused. I just tried to call somebody, it went through for a second, and of course, I'll call you back. I don't know if my signal's gonna
Obviously, though, it's not the same being taken in broad daylight with other people around, but again, Dad assures him that they're not going to get caught. God will protect them. God will blind the eyes of anyone that might see them, and even cameras wouldn't be able to pick them up. And the third point being about Fenton himself, as again, he is trying his hardest to talk his father out of doing this, pointing out all of the issues with their plan, which none of it works, but it's while they're waiting in the van for Mr. March to come walking out of the store that we literally see everything from Fenton's perspective. We get the shot of him looking at the front of the store and then looking over to his father, looking back to see Mr. March walking out, and then back to his father when he takes notice. And again, even with his pleas to his father that he, Fenton, cannot go through with this, he does it anyway. as the older Fenton has already told Agent Doyle he loved his father, but he was still terrified of him. Just as the demon with the name of Edward March is, all it takes is a touch with Dad's ungloved hand for the truth to be revealed, a truth that March didn't think anyone knew about. But God saw him.
And you can't escape God's wrath!
In the garden, we see a very different scene from that of the first time. Fenton and Dad have flipped roles. Fenton now being the one digging, using his anger to power every shovelful. Dad, on the other hand, is very distraught from both what he saw when he revealed the demon's sins, and because Fenton still didn't see the truth that Edward Marsh had been a murderer of young children. There's a lot weighing on both of them for very different reasons, and Adam is just along for the ride. And not just that, but he is all for everything that his father is doing. And it's as, again, Fenton tries to talk him into running away, that Adam fights back, claiming that not only does he want to stay, but that he sees the demons when Dad touches them. And Fenton is fully convinced that his father has brainwashed Adam and tells him this. But that only causes Adam to get up and to run after their father to tell him everything that Fenton has said, leaving Fenton behind and alone with the body to finish burying. It's not until the next morning when Dad goes to speak with Fenton, having him get up and join him at the dinner table. Dad explains that he spent the night praying for Fenton and hoping that the angel would come to him and give him his own vision. But instead, the angel came back to Dad.
He told me something I don't want to believe.
The look of sheer defiance on Fenton's face as he leans in and asks, "What?" is almost unsettling. To see their relationship spiral to this point from where it was even at the beginning of this film is tragic, but Dad isn't yet willing to let it go as he answers Fenton and says that it doesn't matter because they together will prove the angel wrong. Fenton just doesn't have any faith. That's the reason that he can't see the truth, and they're going to change that. And the way that they're going to change that is by Fenton digging a giant hole in the backyard beside the shed. And it has to be 15 foot wide, 15 foot long, and 10 foot deep. If you've ever had to dig a hole before, you would know that that's a lot of dirt. But I don't think you fully understand just how much dirt Fenton needs to move. Doing the math, Fenton needs to move 2,250 cubic feet of dirt. And taking a guess on the low side, for this soil that doesn't seem to be super dense or super moist, one singular cubic foot of this dirt would weigh about 80 pounds, meaning that Fenton needs to move about 180,000 pounds of dirt, or around 82,000 kilograms, to make this hole. Even if Fenton doesn't fully understand what purpose his dad has for him to dig, he digs anyway, doing all that his father told him to do except for pray. He did not. He would not. He hated this. He hated his father. He hated God. And he used all of that hatred and anger to help him dig.
I knew what Dad was doing was wrong, and nothing was going to change that.
It's here that Adam comes out to apologize and console his brother, and it turns out that when Adam went to tell Dad that Fenton had called him a killer and didn't believe anything that he had said so far, the suggestion to run away was left out. Which is good, but it doesn't seem to matter, as again, Adam says that he doesn't want to run away, and has even been praying for Fenton. This only causes Fenton's anger to grow as he refuses the help of his brother and continues digging late into the night. When he finally decides to come in, we can see that the gap between Fenton and the rest of his family has seemingly widened with every single shovelful. Or at least it has for Fenton. His dad understands that Fenton is clearly upset with him, but it only takes him a moment to realize that there's something else wrong with Fenton. It's his hands. All day long, he dug and dug without gloves, and now his hands are blistered and hurting. But even when Dad offers medicine to Fenton, he refuses, saying that he's fine. He didn't need gloves, and he doesn't need these pills. It's not until Dad tells him to take the medicine that Fenton listens. His dad also tells him that he has an extra pair of work gloves, and then he can wear those in a few days after his hands have healed so he can complete the hole. Fenton doesn't listen to this suggestion, as we see he goes right back to work the next morning, again without gloves. But so far, I haven't mentioned the drinks, and since I've already gone this in depth with everything, I don't know why I wouldn't bring them up now. Firstly, is what I assume is sweet tea. This is Texas after all, so it would make sense that maybe this is sweet tea that so happens to have a red tint to it. It's never directly mentioned exactly what they're drinking as a family, and is something I can't seem to really find any information about. This is the worst part about these underrated films, since it's so difficult to find any extra behind the scenes facts and stuff that I want to know. But then again, I probably am the only person that's asking these questions. Other people are just watching the movie. Don't know why I can't just do that. But speaking of this red tea, I assume that it's tinted red for the purpose to be kind of like communion wine. What I do know, though, is that Dad has only drank one beer this entire film, and that's because they're using the same Hamm's beer can from 1979 because they could only find one, which is also the reason that every time it's opened off screen so the sound effect could be added in post.
I wish you could understand that.
Besides the mystery tea and one beer, there's also the water from Adam. So far, all we've seen is him bringing a glass to Fenton today while he's digging, but that won't be the last time. It doesn't seem like much now, but this little act of kindness between brothers shows a lot about their relationship, regardless of what's going on around them. But for the next 5 days, all that is going on around Fenton is digging, meaning that he finally finished digging this ginormous hole by the end of the 6th day. Though on a rewatch, I noticed that it looks like Bill Paxton is at least 9 feet tall in this shot. And it turns out that they couldn't actually dig the hole that deep without reinforcing it and doing all of this extra safety work. So in the shot, he's just on his knees. I don't know why, but that's just the funniest thing to me. Because he goes from being 9 foot tall in my mind to being like 3 foot tall. But with the hole dug and the walls now reinforced, a top built, and the shed now cleaned out, they finally are ready to move the shed on top of the cellar, or as Fenton calls it, the dungeon. Afterwards, a trapdoor is cut into the floor so they could access the cellar. Everything is moved back into the shed, and Dad tells the boys that they did good.
No, I just did as I was told.
But the very next night, when Fenton is told to destroy a demon, instead of taking Otis, he takes the stairs and runs to get help. His entire time running for the sheriff's station, he half expected angels or God or something to stop him, because his determination wouldn't let him turn back for anything else. Problem is, though, it's the middle of the night in a small town and there's no one here at the station. Thankfully, though, the sheriff lives right behind the office, and Fenton caught him just before he was about to leave to go on a fishing trip. Fenton's urgency at least gets Sheriff Small's attention enough to hear his story. A story that he immediately calls crazy and then picks up the phone to call Dad Meeks. Though just before he does, Fenton tells them that he can't call because it's all true and that he can prove it if they go back to his house. Though when they arrive back at the Meeks home, instead of the sheriff following Fenton to the back, he goes straight for the door to speak with Dad, who seems somewhat surprised to see the sheriff, but invites him in and pours him a glass to hear what the problem is, as if he doesn't already know. But for Dad, his biggest concern is that everyone down at the station also heard Fenton's crazy story. But the sheriff reassures him that he was the only one there, and that he doesn't believe it at all.
What does get me, though, is why would he make up such a crazy story?
Now, I find this interesting because in response, Dad says he's not sure. Maybe it's a way to get back at him for Fenton's punishment earlier. And then Dad asks if Fenton told the sheriff that part. And Fenton's response is that he's lying. All they have to do is go out back and check the shed. But it would have been really easy for Dad just to say, "Show the sheriff your hands." Then surely Fenton's hands are still blistered, likely even more so than what they were on that first day. There seems to be a lot that Dad could say to really play up the idea that Fenton is trying to get back at him, but all throughout this, Fenton is very headstrong that they still need to go and check the shed, while Dad, on the other hand, seems off throughout this entire conversation. From the way the sheriff speaks to Dad, it's clear that he's just reading all of this as a struggling, widowed father with a young, rebellious son. But we should be reminded of the warning that Dad received from the angel, that if they were to tell anyone, that then it would put themselves and that person in harm's way, ultimately resulting in that person's death. And you can tell this is exactly what Dad is thinking about when Fenton again pleads with the sheriff to check either the shed or the rose garden, as the sheriff finally caves, believing that this will be the only way to get the boy to let it go. Because it's here that Dad says, well, if it has to be done, it has to be done. What do you think, kiddo?
Does it have to be done?
That slow fade of a smile is so menacing, and it makes this scene so much better. But if we were to put ourselves in Fenton's shoes for a moment, it's gotta be done, right? I mean, he has tried everything else to stop his father and has basically lost his brother in the process. So to now finally have someone here to help, you can't just let this opportunity go. They at least have to look. And that's exactly what they do. They go out to the shed. Fenton opens the cellar door. Dad says that he felt it would be best if they had a storm cellar. And then he hands the sheriff a flashlight, telling him to go ahead and check it out, though to be careful on the stairs because he isn't much of a carpenter. Fenton and Sheriff Smalls descend the stairs to find nothing. Fenton tries to explain, tries to figure out exactly what happened, where the person has gone to, and tries to offer an explanation to the sheriff, but the sheriff doesn't want to hear it anymore. He's seen enough, he's heard enough to know that there is nothing going on. As he turns and begins to make his way up out of the cellar, all while ignoring Fenton's pleas to at least go and check the rose garden. He could show him where the bodies are. And it's here that the sheriff looks back one last time with a look of pity for this young boy.
You've got to believe me!
This whole sequence might just be my favorite in the film. There's just so much tension that has been building up throughout this entire section of the movie to have this payoff. Because even though you just about knew it was coming, it still hits so hard to see Dad at the top of the stairs, and then he slowly comes down to stand over the body of the sheriff, all while Fenton slowly skulks back into the shadows, which is my favorite shot of the movie. And as he does, Dad speaks these final words over the sheriff. "May God welcome you and keep you," just before bringing the axe down again, where we can hear the sound of blood hitting the ground. We were also able to see blood on the axe just a moment ago, something that up until this point hasn't happened, and maybe is the cause for Dad to immediately vomit after this. As we cut over to the rose garden, where even here we see something different. The body of the sheriff. All the other times it appears that once they destroy a demon, they disassemble it into smaller parts before burying. Here though, they plan to bury the sheriff whole. All of these little details cue us in that something here is very different, or at least that's how Dad would see it, since before tonight, he claims that he's never killed anyone. Fenton immediately retorts and says that he's seen him kill plenty, and this causes them to begin going back and forth as Dad blames Fenton for the death of the sheriff, and Fenton fighting back, claiming that there is no plan from God and that Dad is just crazy. All of it leading up to a moment that you would not have expected from Dad as he picks up the shovel and prepares to bring it down on Fenton's head. And it is only the cries of Adam telling his father to stop that causes him to collapse and begin weeping. Something has changed, because up until this point, Dad has been fairly understanding of Fenton's position, even going as far as to tell him that he respects him and is proud of his determination, while yes, Dad did just murder a man because of Fenton attempting to get help. There's something else, something that Dad mentioned earlier with the conversation that he had with the angel about Fenton, though when he first mentioned it, he said that he didn't want to believe. Then he had Fenton dig the hole. It's now as they're headed back to the house that Dad sends Adam inside and tells Fenton to step into the shed so they could talk about exactly what the angel told him. With Otis in hand and blood all over his shirt, Dad looks Fenton in the eyes and questions if he's scared. And Fenton admits that he is scared of his father.
Only demons should fear me. And you're not a demon, are you?
Because according to the angel, he is. But Dad can't believe that. He won't believe that. After all, Fenton is his son, and he tells him that he loves him more than his own life. And that maybe the funniest part of all of this is that he is scared of Fenton. This is the reason that the next part must be done, since Dad can't take another chance at having Fenton run off again, as he opens the door to the cellar and tells Fenton to go. This whole next sequence is terrifying as Fenton tries to make a run for it, but is caught by Dad and then forced to go down into this dungeon. He's then told to begin praying because now only God can help him. Maybe down here he'll finally see the truth and have a vision of his own. With the door now shut and Fenton's only light being through the small crack between the boards, he begins pleading with his dad that he really is Fenton, that he's not a demon, but Dad does his best to drown out his cries with the sound of hammering as he nails the door in place. Fenton is awakened the next morning by his brother bringing him another glass of water. Adam claims that He's not allowed to give him any food and supposed to be just 1 glass of water a day, though if he can, he will try to sneak him more. But for as much as what he wants to help his brother, he chooses to listen to their father, even with Fenton begging for him to pry the door open, saying that he's just going to die down here if he doesn't. Adam tells him that he'll pray for him as he runs out of the shed. It's an interesting experience watching this scene after having rewatched the movie several times, because the first time, everything is just happening so quick. It's just back to back, one thing after another, that you don't really get a chance to fully process how terrible of a situation Fenton is trapped in. Because while he's down here for a full 7 days before the door is opened for Dad to ask him if God had visited him yet, for us, it happens almost instantly. And you know it's bad when something this horrible is so briefly mentioned, especially because it didn't end there. As Dad closes the door and nails it back shut, leaving Fenton there until he loses track of the days. I'm sure this wouldn't be something that the now grown Fenton would want to linger on, and for as tragic as it already is, there's some more information from earlier that I think makes it much worse, since we know that Adam and Fenton's mother is dead, but also they don't have any close living relatives outside of the 3 of them. Pair this with it being summer break now, there's just no one that is going to be able to help Fenton other than Adam. There's not even anyone else besides Dad and Adam that knows where Fenton is.
I finally went beyond fear into total insanity.
And eventually it happened. He had a vision. He had seen God and finally understood his destiny. And it seems this experience was nearly too much for him, as the next day when Adam comes to check on him, Fenton is unresponsive. So they open the door, Dad picks him up, and Fenton tells him that he had seen God, and they all take a moment together. Then we see them as a family again, sitting around the dinner table as Fenton is finally getting to eat. Adam, of course, has a ton of questions, and Fenton just tells Dad that he's sorry for ever doubting him. Adam, though, becomes upset because he says that it's not fair since all he has ever seen are demons, yet Fenton gets to see God, leading Dad to say one of the most chilling lines in the film, "That's right, but look at the price he paid." Adam then follows this up by asking if they're now going to get a demon, and they will, just as soon as Fenton's ready.
My first demon was to be Brad White from Dallas.
And well, Brad sucks. As just like with Mr. Edward March, we get to see Dad and Fenton capture this demon, again by setting up a ploy to essentially catch Brad off guard so they can then hit him over the head with a pipe, load him up in the van, and bring him back to the cellar. A task that they just barely pull off, since their whole plan is to ask Brad for a tire iron so that way they can change a flat on the van. But from the moment Brad sees them, he's already skeptical, just as anyone would be when a strange man and his son, who are both wearing gloves for some reason, show up at your porch and knock on your door asking for help in the middle of the night. Though it does seem that if Fenton wasn't here, Brad probably would have just told Dad to leave, or would have told him the same thing that he says to his girlfriend or wife, which is to mind your business, you very kind and lovable lady. That's what he says. But it's as they head around back to Brad's garage that Fenton steps farther into the room and accidentally knocks something over. This causes Brad to jump and to turn, looking back at Dad just in time to see the pipe raised in the air, giving Brad the perfect opportunity to swing the tire iron into Dad's side, But again, it's a good thing that Fenton is here as he steps over, hits Brad, allowing just enough of an opening for Dad to deliver the final knockout. There's a deleted scene that takes place just after this when they make it back home and they're trying to unload Brad. As Adam has fallen asleep in the back of the van, we see Dad wince in pain, causing Fenton to ask, "Wasn't God supposed to protect us?" A good point, but one that is quickly answered by Dad, explaining that God did. He was working through Fenton tonight. But I would be willing to guess that Fenton's questioning was left out for a reason, likely to ensure that the next scene cuts even deeper. It's back in the cellar that we now find Fenton with Otis in hand and prepared to fulfill his destiny. Dad tells him that he's proud of him and has been looking forward to this moment since all of this began. As he then takes off his gloves and reveals Brad for the demon that he truly is, we also see Adam coming down the stairs just in time to witness the truth of Mr. Brad White. But it's Brad who I find most interesting, all because his character is so different than the other demons we've seen. In fact, all of the demons have been nothing alike. The first one, Cynthia Harbridge, just seemed like a completely normal lady caught off guard, maybe on her way to work. The entire time she was bound, she only whimpered and tried to plead through the tape over her mouth for all of this to stop. The next one, Mr. Edward March, also seemed like a normal guy, just out shopping one day, but then he spent the majority of his time in silence, just being too shocked by what is happening to really react. The third one was the younger man that Fenton tried to save by getting the sheriff, whose name I believe was Dennis according to the list. We of course don't see enough about him to know anything more than his age, since even the credits refer to him as Teenage Demon. And speaking of the list, it does appear that there was another demon that was destroyed during the time that Fenton was in the cellar. As we can see, there is another name of Scott just above that of Brad White, who is the only one that we get a different view of. We don't see a nice normal guy, but instead someone who is angry and mean, even now constantly cursing at Dad just before he lays his hand on him. Not to say that anger isn't a reaction that would be expected in this moment, just that it's different. All of these people, all of these demons, look and act very different from one another. But that doesn't change the fact that now is the time for Fenton to fulfill his destiny, as Dad tells him to do it, destroy the demon. Dad collapses to the ground, Otis buried in his chest. Adam rushes to his side, but there's nothing he can do as Fenton stands defiant and looks over what he's done, certain that he has made the right choice, believing that he has fulfilled his destiny. In Dad's final moments, he looks up at his oldest son with overwhelming sadness in his eyes as he then leans over to whisper something to Adam and then takes his last breath. The brothers then share a stare, both full of anger, as one can't believe what was just done and the other believing that it was the only way. And it's in the moment that Fenton turns to remove the tape from Brad's mouth that Brad lets out a furious scream as he watches Adam sprint across the room and bring the axe right down into his neck. It's here that Fenton's story to Agent Doyle comes to a close, as after this they buried their father in the rose garden and then waited a week before calling the sheriff's station, where they just told them that one day Dad didn't come home. They then ended up in the foster system and eventually were separated. And ever since, Fenton hasn't told anyone this story. Not until now. Though Doyle asks, if Adam ever told anyone, leaving the distraught Fenton to answer,
Listen, you mind if we just sit here a while? I don't much feel like talking anymore.
This is such a good line that is delivered perfectly from Matthew McConaughey, but the best part about it is, regardless of if this is your first time or your fifth time watching the movie, it makes perfect sense with your understanding of the film. Just like so many other lines in this film, the way that they're written can apply in multiple different ways, and each one of them work so well within the scene. But it's not just the writing that is excellent, the execution from everyone is flawless. And luckily for us, we get to see more of both as Fenton and Doyle make their way into the garden. With Fenton leading the way and Doyle still curious about this promise that Fenton made to Adam to bury him in the garden, we then get this excellent transition shot to go back to the night when Fenton and Adam buried their father, where after Fenton was done patting the dirt back down, he looked at Adam and said, Adam, if you ever destroy me, promise me you'll bury me here. And Adam swore to God that he would. But Doyle doesn't seem to understand, and even calls Fenton out for this confusing promise, since it should have been Fenton promising to Adam that he would bury him here, not Adam promising Fenton to bury Fenton in the rose garden. None of it makes sense. But the man before Agent Doyle assures him that it does.
The man standing in front of you is Adam Meeks.
What would you do if God came to you in a vision to tell you that you and your family have been chosen to fight and destroy demons? His father chose to listen and do as he had been called. His older brother chose to fight back against this calling. The man that we have been led to believe as Fenton Meeks ultimately chose to follow in his father's footsteps. As Agent Doyle says that he must have been the one to kill all of those people, but Adam denies this, since, after all, Fenton's the one that is the killer. Adam has never killed anyone in his life. But everything will make sense to Agent Doyle in just a moment. First, they need to make it to where Adam buried his brother. This time, as Adam leads the way, Agent Doyle makes sure that he takes it slow as he holds him at gunpoint. But the sight that awaits Agent Doyle still doesn't add up, because there were only 6 victims of the God's Hand killer, and there are way more graves here. But Adam clarifies that Fenton didn't bury his victims.
Kept him his trophies in his basement.
This here and these graves, this is where Adam puts his demons. That's the reason that Fenton is buried here, as he was one of the demons that ended up on Adam's list, and Fenton knew that Adam would eventually come for him. That's the reason he started to leave notes on his own victims as a way to lure his brother in. And while it took a little bit of time, Adam eventually did, though he had to wait for Fenton to be added to his list. Otherwise, Adam wouldn't be destroying a demon, he would be committing murder. We then see how Fenton really died, or was destroyed according to Adam. Though the most shocking part of all of this to Agent Doyle is the fact that Adam really believes this, but of course he does. He always has. He wasn't lying to his brother when he said that he sees the demons when Dad touches them. It's here that we finally get to see exactly what the demon Cynthia Harbridge had done, as well as witness the sins of the demon known as Edward March. And for as crazy as it sounds, Doyle has heard enough as he raises the gun, knowing that he has the upper hand, until Adam brings up his mother again, telling him that regardless of what Doyle does, it won't bring his mother back. She died and her killer got away. It's here that Doyle makes a mistake, as instead of pulling the trigger, he steps closer to hit Adam with the pistol, but all it takes is one touch as Adam catches his hand and Doyle loses all of his strength and his sins are revealed. His mother's killer did get away for a while, but in the words of Dad Meeks, he didn't think anyone knew about that, but God did. This is the real reason for Adam's ploy in pretending to be his brother, all of it to get Agent Doyle all alone and back here to the garden.
How did you know?
You were on the list.
Not only is this amazing, but it was all planned out. Adam even has the hole already dug with Otis lying nearby, ready to destroy another demon. Even when Doyle tries to argue that other FBI agents will come looking for him, Adam reminds him that they will be looking for Fenton, of which Agent Doyle will be his final victim. The final victim of the serial killer that was given the name the God's Hand Killer. And as far as everyone that has Seen Adam's face, he simply says that God will protect him as he brings the axe down and destroys another demon. Now, if the movie ended here, the ending would be left ambiguous so that anyone can freely argue their side, whether this is Adam and he's just been brainwashed by his father and is now some insane religious killer who just wanted revenge on his brother. Or if this is Fenton and he completely made up this entire backstory as a way to kill the man that is in charge of finding him. Or even that it's all completely true and that God really did send an angel to speak with their father, to tell them that their duty is to now destroy demons, of which Adam's own brother was. If it wasn't for the final 5 minutes of this movie, I don't think I would have cared enough to even make this video. Because while I love ambiguous endings and being able to theorize about what really happened, the ending of this movie makes the film so much more terrifying. We get the definitive answer. Everything that Dad said was true, and Adam was right about God protecting him, because even though they did see his face and Agent Hole admitting that he shook his hand, it's all just a blur now. Even every single one of the cameras that recorded Adam that night malfunctioned at each opportunity that the agents would have had to see who this is. The man that they believed to be Fenton Meeks. Armed with the knowledge of his name, they raid his house to find it empty, but in the basement, they find Agent Doyle's blood-stained badge.
Is he down there too? Not him.
And I know some people are a bit confused at exactly what that means, but again, Adam was telling the truth. His older brother, Fenton Meeks, really was the God's Hand Killer, and he really did kill and keep his victims in his basement. There were no living people down there, and Agent Doyle's body was not found down there, but all of the other missing people that they have been looking for that they believe were killed by the God's Hand Killer were found down here in Fenton's basement. Now, in the beginning, when Adam first meets Agent Doyle, he tells Doyle that he drove down here after burying his brother, to which Doyle then leaves the room to call up Enid County to try to verify Adam's story with the sheriff. But instead, it's the secretary, Becky, that answers the phone and explains to Doyle that Fenton, which is really Adam, had gotten into a lot of crazy stuff earlier that day, going as far as to steal an ambulance and his brother's body, but she claimed that the sheriff doesn't have any issues as long as Fenton returns the ambulance. This is the reason that Agent Hole pays a visit to the Enid County Sheriff's Station, where not only do we see that Becky is pregnant, but also that we already know who the sheriff is. It's Adam. Adam is the sheriff, and Becky just so happens to be his wife, which is why she went along with the story to convince Agent Doyle that Adam, who was pretending to be Fenton, was telling the truth, which sounds confusing, but it's not, and I'll explain exactly why in a moment. First, though, Agent Hull needs to talk to Adam about his brother Fenton, because he felt it was best to let Adam know the truth about his brother being the God's Hand killer and actually having bodies in his basement before they went public with all of this information. So Adam thanks him. Agent Hull tells him that if he can think of anything, any place that Fenton might have gone to give him a call. And it's with a final handshake that Adam Meeks holds on for just a moment longer to tell Agent Hull that he's a good man. Hull, unsure of how to take this, just nods and heads for his car, leaving behind Adam and Becky Meeks as we're reminded of Adam's purpose with his final words.
God's will has been served.
First, to take care of the confusing part. Because why should we trust Adam, being that he lied about who he was in the beginning, and then proceeded to lie about his own experience growing up? Since, to be clear, the man that we have been listening to this entire time is the younger son, Adam Meeks, who recounted the story of his childhood from the perspective of his older brother Fenton to Agent Doyle shortly after having buried Fenton in the Rose Garden. It's Adam's reason for being here that makes it all make sense, which is to destroy the demon that is Agent Doyle. So he does everything in his power to ensure that no one else hears his story, since, as we know, one of the warnings from the angel was that if anyone else is told, then that person will die. So here is Adam in the middle of the night, under the guise of his brother, to get the attention of his next target without putting anyone else in harm's way. Clearly, it worked, actually really well, to lure Doyle to the garden. But from Doyle's perspective, this also makes perfect sense, whether he is just a detective or is a demon. Because if he is just a detective, this is his case and someone has brought him information about it. Insane information, but it's information, which he also calls this out for not being the way that these cases work from the very beginning. Straight up telling Adam, Fenton, to his knowledge at the time, that people don't just walk in here and essentially hand the killer over. But since this is his case, it does make sense for him to at least hear the crazy man out that is in his office and then do the same thing that Sheriff Smalls does by feeling that it would be best to go to the place that he keeps talking about to at least appease the convictions of Mr. Meeks. After all, that's what a good detective would do, not seeing this as something that he needs to bother other agents about, but at least hearing these very serious claims and going to check it out. That you probably got on your first watch, but on a second watch, you realize that it also makes perfect sense for Doyle to do the exact same thing if he is a demon. Being as, for one, this is his job, but also if this man were to come to you and tell you that his father and brother have been called to destroy demons, it would be in your best interest to know where these people are, to hear the whole story, understand how they work, how many of them that there are, how long they've been doing this, and most importantly, to ensure that both of them are dead, So even when they make it to the garden and Adam reveals that he really is the younger brother and has always believed this, Doyle would still be unsure whether or not he's telling the truth. That is until Adam Meek's ungloved hands touch Agent Doyle, because if you watch closely, you will have realized that Adam has been avoiding being touched by or touching Doyle until the perfect moment. As in the very first moments when Doyle arrives to his office and sees Mr. Meek sitting there, he reaches out for a handshake, but instead Adam is holding on to a picture of Doyle's mother, to which he then carefully places it into the agent's hands. A little later on, when Adam explains how his dad would reveal the sins of the demons by touching them, he holds out his hands as though he may also have that same power. Then, when it's time for them to get into the car and head to the rose garden, Doyle throws Adam a set of handcuffs, which Adam is reluctant to put on at first, but at the mention of Doyle telling him that if he doesn't do it, Doyle will do it for him. Right after this, Doyle makes Adam sit in the back of the car, where as he goes to get in, Doyle attempts to reach for Adam's head to keep him from hitting it on the top of the car. But in just the nick of time, Adam avoids it and gets in on his own. All of these little moments, and maybe even more, that I've missed, so that not only would Doyle's true identity be kept a secret until the perfect time, but also Adam's. And Adam had a purpose for being here, but also through him telling this story of his childhood from the perspective of his brother, it's a way for him to eulogize Fenton. We have no idea if the things Adam said were truly what Fenton felt, or if this was all just his own hopeful explanation of who he believed his brother was on the inside, as it's clear that he had many, many years to think about Fenton's actions and exactly what his dad told him about his brother in those final moments. This is the reason that after his story is finished, he asks if it's okay for them just to sit there for a while.
I don't much feel like talking anymore.
Since this is his way of doing the same as his father did in choosing to believe something different about Fenton, though it is interesting to go back and watch this film with the understanding that Fenton is a demon. Some of the looks that he gives throughout the film, some of the responses that he says and how he says them, all of it become a lot more chilling, which is both a huge credit to the writing as well as to the young actor Matt O'Leary's performance as Fenton. All of the performances throughout this film are top-notch, and clearly the writing is just incredible. Like, even some of the very first lines that are here and the way that they're delivered from McConaughey reveal so much more about who he really is than what you would understand on a first watch.
You hadn't even heard me out yet, and already you doubt me. Why is that?
Just further proving Paxton's point about purposefully making this movie for multiple viewings, since the first time you do watch it subjectively, you're just caught up in the creep factor of everything. You hear a line like this from Mr. Fenton Meeks to Agent Doyle, and it makes you think, yeah, Doyle, what's wrong with you? A guy comes into your office, he sits here, and he tries to give you all of this information about the case that you're working on, and you don't even give him the time of day. But then you watch it again, and you pick up on lines like this.
Sometimes truth defies reason, Agent Doyle.
And you quickly realize that there are a lot of clues that were laid out to give us the truth, but also to make rewatching the film a completely new experience. Something that, if the ending would have been left off in the garden or been left somewhat ambiguous, you would completely miss out on. Of course, I say somewhat ambiguous since, after all, the moment that Adam touches Agent Doyle just collapses like a rag doll and then asks Adam, "How did you know?" I guess there are ways that you could argue around that, but luckily we don't have to. And I'm sure after all of this, you're still left with a number of questions, but there are still 3 big questions that we need to answer. First, what would you do if God came to you in a vision to tell you that the end of the world is near and that you and your family have been chosen to fight and destroy demons? This is rather a personal question that I feel each one of us would answer differently, but I would hope we would all at least be able to explain why we chose what we did. Though, of course, it's not to be forgotten that this movie, again, is not making any religious statements. It's simply a what if. But to answer it for myself, I would surely have a lot of questions, which should be fine because, as I said earlier, my initial thought process would be to fact check what I am being told by God and then compare that with what he has told to others before me. I would end up doing the same thing that Moses did when he found the burning bush. Y'all know exactly what I'm talking about. You've seen the Prince of Egypt, but basically God calls to Moses out of this bush and tells him that he is now going to fulfill a 400-year-old prophecy by sending Moses back to speak with Pharaoh to set his people free.
Who am I to lead these people?
And in response, Moses protests, asking, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? It's not like I was raised with him, but who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" And God, who is literally speaking to Moses out of a bush that is on fire yet isn't burnt up, tells him, "Don't worry about it. I'll be with you." Again, though, Moses is like, "Yeah, but what if they ask who sent me? Like, what name am I supposed to give? I can't just show up and be like, hey, let's go." So God, being patient, says, "I am has sent you, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. That is what you will tell them." And you know, at this point, you would figure Moses is like, God's got an answer for any of the questions and concerns I may have. I should probably just trust him. Instead, he does exactly what I would do in this situation and keeps asking questions. God even gives him these different signs that he can do to prove to the people that God really did send Moses to them. He has it where his staff turns into a snake, and when he reaches down to pick it back up by the tail, it turns back into his staff again. He also has it to where he can reach into his coat with one hand, and then when he pulls it out, he has leprosy all over the hand, to which he could then put it back in his coat, and when he takes it back out again, everything is completely back to normal. And he can also take some of the water from the Nile River, and when he pours it out onto the ground, the water turns into blood. So many signs, so many questions asked and answered. And even after all this, Moses tells God that he's really not that good at speaking, even has a stuttering problem, to which God's like, "Dude, I made you. I'll handle it." And it's not until Moses finally pleads, saying, "Please just pick anyone else," that God gets irritated and says, "Fine, I will send your brother Aaron with you to help you and to speak for you," but still reminds Moses that this is his mission, his calling, and something that he will need to do, but he doesn't have to do it alone. Awesome, you guys got your Sunday school lesson, but I say this as just one of the examples in the Bible of where God has shown up to someone, told them, "Hey, this is what you need to do." But then that person just has a ton of questions, concerns, and doubts, all of which I too would definitely have. Another big point that is brought up both in the movie and in interviews is about Abraham and Isaac.
The story of Abraham plays predominantly in the story structure.
As towards the end, Adam compares the story of Abraham being called to sacrifice his son Isaac to that of his dad needing to destroy the demon that is his son Fenton.
God didn't take pity on Dad like he did Abraham.
Instead, his father's duty to destroy Fenton fell to him. But again, I would have questions because there is a very important detail separating these two stories. One with Fenton, who his father was told was a demon, and the other with Isaac, who was the promised son of Abraham, as God had told Abraham that it would be through Isaac that Abraham's lineage would be a greater number than the stars. So in Genesis 22, when God shows back up to tell Abraham to take his son Isaac and sacrifice him, this leaves Abraham in a different spot than what you might expect. Since if Isaac dies, that means the lineage dies too, meaning that God would break his promise to Abraham, and going off of Abraham's understanding, that doesn't make any sense. But even so, that doesn't stop Abraham from toiling over what he was told, even getting up early the next morning and going out and saddling his own donkey and cutting his own wood for this offering instead of having his servants do it for him. Since even though Abraham was very well off at this point, he knew this was something he had to do. But it's also clear that he believed that Isaac couldn't die, or at least if he did, God would have to bring him back to life. He already spent 25 years waiting for God to fulfill his promise for Isaac to be born, so he's sure that God will also fulfill his promise of a lineage greater than the stars. Of course, leave it to me to give a long explanation about how I would just ask a bunch of questions. And I know some of y'all out there would just be like, well, that was a weird dream, and go about your day, while others would be like the young Adam and just think it's super cool that you now have superpowers. But again, if this was me in Dad Meek's position, I would be asking a lot of questions, and I would be trying my hardest to think through every little thing to figure out what is the real bigger plan that is going on here. But I will say that it is incredible how they did a complete flip of the story of Abraham and Isaac over to Dad Meeks and Fenton. And I believe that a flip is how the writer described the twist in this film, which leads us to our second big question. Is this a perfect twist? And I'll let you take a guess. Do you think I would have spent all this time covering every single detail and explaining all of my thoughts if this wasn't a perfect twist? I've already explained how the story is incredible, that the acting is amazing all the way through from all of the characters, how there are little details in the beginning that line up with the end to make your second watch that much better. Clearly, the satisfaction for this film is very high, meaning that the Poltergeiger is also off the charts. The only thing that I can't understand is how more people have not already covered this film. Maybe it's because people feel weird about the ending. Any religious groups going, well, that's not how we want people to look at our religion or believe that that's what we believe about how God works, as well as anyone who's not religious struggling with the idea that the good guy won in the end. Really, this movie wasn't made for either of you, because clearly it was made for me. But honestly, most of the reviews that I've seen of people talking about this movie online, the vast majority of people love everything about this, especially for anyone that likes a good twist, of which this one not only is a good twist, but I would call it a perfect twist, meaning that we now have 4 perfect twists that we have found on our search for the greatest twist in all of horror media, with potentially there being 3 others that still need to be decided on from the last video, since those were short stories and didn't quite meet my normal ranking system, but did receive a quick 10 out of 10. Just need y'all's help to figure out exactly where I should put those in the list. But if I'm being honest, I'm just surprised that this series is now 19 videos long. That's incredible, and I can't thank y'all enough for watching so many of these. And I think for episode 20, it needs to be something special. I have an idea, but if you have a suggestion, please let me know. And I know that this video is already incredibly long because it's taken me so many more days to research than I expected. But if you made it to this point in the video, I just thank you so much. I know everyone else tells you to like and subscribe, but watching the video to the end is what helps me most. But of course, I'm not going to say no to you liking and subscribing to the channel. And another big help, of course, is the channel members, which do really make all of this so much easier. Y'all allow me to actually be able to purchase some stuff for the video, like the axe, or even upgrade my microphone, which I hope sounds so much better than the last one, because I dropped the last one and there was like a dent in the top and I was having to deal with that on the back end. I bet you some of you noticed. So thank you, channel members, for helping me to upgrade. Oh, and since you made it all the way here, and Curmudgeon did put it in at the end of his last video, the secret side project that I've been working on with Curmudgeon and King Newsme is a podcast. We have a podcast, or we will have a podcast. We're still working on it because we want to make sure everything's perfect for a launch for y'all. Though in the meantime, you can go over to Let's Split Up Podcast right here on YouTube and subscribe. With all of that, I still have one final question for you. But first, I need you to take my hand, have an extra blessed day, and remember,
Only demons should fear me. You're not a demon, are you?